everybody, we're the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Erin.
I'm Dr. Kristen.
We are both social scientists with PhDs who love learning about both lived in and popular culture. We are educators who use concepts like empathy and inclusivity to explore a whole host of things, from systemic racism to gender and imprisonment in The Handmaid's Tale. We run the literal gamut, folks. We love to have conversations, not just with ourselves in person and via Zoom, but also with you lovely folks. So be sure to subscribe to the channel, like any videos, and comment below to join the chat. We actually enjoy and try to respond to all comments and questions.
We do. We love having the chat. So this video, as my camera blurs in and out, so apologies, guys, we don't know what's going on. This video is part of our Colonizers World Tour, where we are spending 2021 looking at a different country every single week and talking about how their history or relationship with colonialization has affected how they interact with the world. We are on the final week of the areas of the world that have never been, I guess, like touched in a way, like they're not influenced or colonized at all by Europe. Yeah. So we've covered Thailand, Antarctica, Korea, and now Japan. In terms of what we had known about Japan before we got here, Dr. Erin, what did you know?
Yeah. What I learned in the last 2 days of my fire hydrant guzzling of Japanese history is that I knew not a lot.
You had heard of sushi?
I had heard of sushi. I have had sushi. My brother, and you guys will meet him this week as well. He did a welcome to my world video for us about Japanese gaming. My brother has been interested in Japanese culture since high school, so almost 20 years now. But as I learned this week and through my conversations with him, I didn't really understand that much, but I knew about anime and I knew about sushi. I knew about Japanese gin because Dr. Kristen brought me some from Japan. Obviously World War II and Pearl Harbor and like what I was told in history classes, and Japanese internment camps, because I actually did a lot of research on American Japanese internment camps. And everything else is what I learned from Man in the High Castle, which surprisingly goes into a good amount of Japanese culture. Whether or not it's accurate, I don't know. But that's where I learned the word Yakuza. So
cool. I cheated a little bit because I spent a week in Japan for my 5th wedding anniversary. So there's a little bit more, but I think one of
the spectrum there.
End of the spectrum. I mean, a whole week, I obviously learned a whole ton. But something that I've been particularly kind of struck by as we've been thinking about Japan is that a lot of Japanese culture, even though it is in Japanese, feels more accessible to Americans than some other elements of things. And some of that, I think, is the high rate of exchange, especially in the 1980s between Japan and America. And I mean, like, how many business people do I know that spend a good chunk of their time in Tokyo and going back and forth and things like that? And it's not, and part of like their post-World War II strategy was to open themselves up and to be more. So it's just it's very easy to know a lot of things about Japan. But so yeah, sushi. I love Japanese whiskey. Japanese food in general is probably one of my favorite genres of food. I would eat sushi every day if my budget allowed it.
And your husband makes mean ramen.
Yeah, we do make and we're progressing to making homemade noodles for the ramen. So,
and through their love of ramen from their trip to Japan, I now have a love of ramen. And we now go to really, really yummy ramen places when we travel. Well, in the before times we did.
In the before times, and we will again.
And we will again in the after times.
There's so much to enjoy, but I think if I was going to summarize even before this week, like what Japan culture is that it is quiet in ways that American culture doesn't feel quiet. And that, which is a bit of a misnomer, I understand, but that makes sense in my head. But that it is always excellent and that there is a real veneer of perfection. That mess is not a cultural value in the way that I think the popularity of the Real Housewives would say that America loves a mess. So Not the vibe I get. I do not get a mess vibe from Japan.
No,
but
we love messes, and particularly hot messes.
God, do we love a hot mess. But in terms of demographics, talk us through it.
Yes. So, real brief rundown of stats that will also, thanks to our wonderful graphic designer and video editor, show up on the screen as I am talking. Population of Japan is around 125 million. Largest city and capital city is Tokyo. Japanese is the national language. There's an indigenous language, Ainu, which I will get to in a minute. The currency is the Japanese yen. They have a system of government that is very, very similar to the United Kingdom in a constitutional monarchy. The first constitution was in 1890. The emperor still holds the title as the symbol of national unity, but all the power lies with the politicians making decisions. It is divided into 47 prefectures, which I did not know
that. Okay.
That is a lot.
Are they like counties, prefectures, we think?
I have no idea. I didn't go that far.
Got it.
Obviously, it is an island country in East Asia located in the Pacific Ocean. It spans an archipelago of 6,852 islands, covering 377,000 square kilometers. There are 5 main islands, however, Hokkaido, Honshu, Shikoku, Kyushu, and Okinawa. Apologies for any mispronunciations. So that's the bare bones of it. Dr. Donnelly, as our resident religious historian and socio-religious expert, will explain a little bit more about the religious breakdown in Japan.
In a truly shockingly effective way, Japan has retained its indigenous religion despite a lot of attempts by both Japanese and external leaders to shift it. So it's been Shinto, which is and this is a fire hydrant overview, the indigenous Japanese religion. It's very spiritualistic. It's very connected to nature and ancestors. It's not something that really exists a whole lot outside of Japan. If you meet a non-Japanese Shinto practitioner in Piscataway, New Jersey, the likelihood that it's an authentic Shinto practice is probably low. So it's probably. There was a lot of attempts to bring Buddhism into it. Didn't really work. Christian missionaries were executed for a long time, so that wasn't really a play. And unlike where we talked about in South Korea, where there's quite a lot of Christians, and there's the relationship with China and external and internal organized religion is a whole separate video. Japan stands out to a lot of religious scholars that I've done, specifically in how it has held on to its indigenous faith.
Yeah, I mean, when I was looking up some of the stats, 1.5% of the country identifies as Christian, which is really, really small.
Yeah.
And around 80% Shinto, and then Buddhism and others make up the rest. But yeah, I wasn't expecting Christianity to be that low, especially knowing how it's not super high, but higher in other Asian nations. So we like to focus on, aside from demographics, 2 pretty big issues in all of these countries: gender and LGBTQ life. So suffrage for Japanese women came in right after World War II. So they got suffrage in 1945. The monarchy is strictly male only. So it's still a gendered and male dominated society. The average Japanese woman makes 40% less than the average man, so not great. 1 in 10 management positions are held by women, also not great. There is a very strong tradition of being housewives after marriage.
Okay.
Abortion is legal with some restrictions. Birth control pill was only legalized in 1999, which is a lot later. Most couples, apparently, according to the stats, prefer to just use condoms, but now they have the pill, but compared to the rest of Asia, it came in much later. For LGBTQ life, it was legal before 1872, so Japan was kind of progressive about that. It went through an 8-year period where it was illegal. Since 1880, legalized again. Change of sex is allowed for transgender folks. Sexual orientation is protected in some cities in terms of discrimination, but not on a national level.
Okay.
And there is no legal recognition of same-sex relationships on any government level. Same-sex couples cannot adopt, but if you are a queer person and you are single, you can adopt. So a little bit murky, but similar to what we looked at in Korea. It's not illegal, but they don't have the same legal rights, certainly for marriage and partnership level. So covering
not a great look, Japan, on the equity front. Not a great look.
Not a great look on the equity front. You know, swings and roundabouts, as we say, on some things. But what we like to finish up with in these videos is the things that we were most fascinated by or learned that were very interesting. So I'll go first because Dr. Kristen's is pretty damn depressing. But I mean, y'all, we learned some stuff about Japanese history. There's going to be a boatload of links below to YouTube videos from a whole host of folks that know more than us.
Way more.
Did more work than us.
Way more.
So click those links and follow those people. We're very, very grateful for the work that they've done on the YouTubes to help educate us. So the two things that I learned was more about the indigenous Ainu people who the Hokkaido, I believe, is like the northernmost island, large island. And so that's where most of them, Hokkaido, were located. And so for a long time, the Japanese didn't make it that far.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I saw that on one of the videos that there was a cutoff at some point, which I'm assuming it has to do with topography.
So they started colonizing the territory a long time ago, but it took them a while to get total control of it.
Okay.
They don't have a great record at all in terms of forced assimilation and discrimination based on perceived ethnic differences in the way that Ainu people look physically, their hair, their skin tone, all that kind of stuff. Very similar to other forms of ethnic discrimination we see everywhere. So Japan's on board with the rest of the world for that one. In 1889, there was an action that declared them former Aborigines. I have no idea what that means, but it wasn't good. And only in 2008, Japan acknowledged them as ethnically indigenous people and reversed that 1899 action. There's very few scattered groups left, mainly on Hokkaido, working to maintain their identity, but they do have a distinct language, distinct from Japanese, but that is also dying out. So I learned that. The second thing is a hilariously complicated story about the origins of the word kamikaze. And it literally derives from the 13th century when the Mongols tried to invade Japan twice. And the first time they were hit with a typhoon before they even made land, destroyed all the ships. The second time they made land and there were some battles, but then another typhoon came. So 2 typhoons in 6 years knocked them out. And the Japanese were like, that's crazy. We have to come up for an explanation for this. So they made up the word kamikaze, which means divine wind. And they believed that the gods and their beliefs were behind why the Mongols were destroyed by typhoons. And so it led to a huge rise in Shintoism again, because Buddhism had kind of taken hold for a while, and Zen Buddhism. And the rise in Shintoism was because of these crazy typhoons.
Sure. I love it.
I was fascinated. I love to learn the etymology of words.
Yeah, it's one of her hobbies.
That's gonna come up on Jeopardy someday, and I'm gonna
nail it, girl. You're gonna nail it.
I am gonna know that answer. Yeah, Dr. Kristen, what was the thing that you learned?
Well, I learned that the Japanese government was a whole feckin' pile of awful for a real long time.
Y'all, it's not good.
Okay, so very famously, the Nazis killed 6 million Jews at least, and Jewish sympathizers and everything else, and like that's the number that we hold for World War II. You know, there's some noise about Russia killing probably just as many, but we don't really ever, the Nazis are the big bads of World War II. We are here to tell you that the Japanese government would like the Nazis to hold their beer because they killed somewhere between 8 and 12 million Chinese folks, including something that you may have heard of called the Rape of Nanking, in which they essentially decimated a town in China.
It was the capital of China at the time. That's why it was such a popular, that's why they wanted to destroy it.
Okay, there we go. There was so much awful that I absorbed.
No, I know.
Some details. Sure. It was 1937. I do remember that. Nanking was 1937. However, much like how the United States, children are not taught about how we treated Indigenous people or how we've handled our versions of colonialism. And like we've learned that British children are never taught about the true Irish history. It appears to us that Japanese children are not taught the more holistic view of their government and country's behavior historically. And so in a certain way, I joked with Dr. Aaron that that's comforting. Like nationalism is so strong everywhere. Like this is a human thing, not just not just a white person thing, not just an American imperialism thing.
Yeah, the link below to the John Green video on nationalism, he makes a great point that like nationalism often thrives in conflict.
Because it's a lot about constructing who you are against something else.
Yeah, it's who you are and who the others are. And so you have to have the others to build up the nationalism. Watch that video below, y'all, because it's amazing. But it was nice to know that like, oh, nationalism is nationalism everywhere.
We've discovered some more works, especially on the rape of Nanking, which is the term for it. This isn't us being glib. And some other elements of World War II that we didn't know. So it's entirely possible that we'll come back at you later on in the year with some more resources on this. And we'll still tag it with the same tag. So if you're watching this, this will go up at the end of March. If you're watching this in August and we've done some other stuff, don't worry, the playlist will update. And we are more than I think any of the other cultures we've talked about so far. What we were overwhelmed by quickly is how deep the rabbit holes could go for us on this personally. Just our personal fascinations and some other things, our love of gin and whiskey and sake and food. I could talk at length about Iron Chef and how it talks about gender in professional cooking. So there's lots and lots of things that we'd like to talk about, but we do need to move on. Yes. So the rest of this week will be Japanese week. Don't worry. We will see you on Wednesday for our review of one of the most popular Japanese movies of recent times. Then I'll show back up on Thursday with Dr. Aaron's brother, in which he will geniusly talk to us about gaming and what fandom and hobbies mean. And even if you've never encountered them before. So we will see you then.
We're looking forward to it, y'all. See you then.